I recently went on vacation with my older brother, his wife, their 2 kids, and a larger group of friends and their families. My brother and I have always been close, and since a lot of the people in this group grew up together, it was not unusual for us to take trips like this. However, this was the first time that all the kids were coming along. It was supposed to be a nice, relaxing getaway, and since my brother and his wife rarely get any alone time because of their kids, he made me an offer before we left. He told me that if I was willing to help out with his kids for a day or 2 so that he and his wife could have some time to themselves, he would cover the cost of my entire vacation. Normally, he would pay for half of my trip since he liked having me around, and I would help out here and there anyway, so it was not a big deal to me. I love my niece and nephew, and spending time with them never feels like a chore. Since I would be on vacation, I did not mind watching them for a couple of days in exchange for an all-expenses-paid trip. It felt like a win-win situation. On the first night of the trip, we all went out to dinner together. The restaurant was nice, and the atmosphere was lively with all the kids running around and the parents trying to keep them in check. I was sitting with my brother's wife, Rose, talking about the plans for the next day when she mentioned that she and my brother would be going out early for an appointment and asked if the kids could just spend the night in my room so they would not have to wake them up in the morning. I agreed, figuring it would be easier for everyone. That was when one of my brother's friend's girlfriends, Ally, made a snide comment. She laughed and said something along the lines of, "Wow, must be nice having a vacation nanny," while she was struggling to get her own child to settle down. I was not really sure how to respond, so I just brushed it off with a small laugh. I figured she was just venting about the struggles of parenting. Later that night, after dinner, I was getting my niece and nephew ready for bed when there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw Ally standing there with her son. At first, I thought she was just stopping by to chat or maybe wanted me to watch him for a little while, which I was fine with. But then I heard her tell her son, "Okay, be good for her. I'll see you tomorrow." That was when I realized she was trying to drop him off for the night. I was caught off guard, but tried to keep my response polite. I told her that I did not mind watching him for a couple of hours, but he could not stay the night. She immediately frowned and pointed out that my niece and nephew were staying with me, so she did not see why her son could not. I explained that there was no room for him and that my brother's kids were used to spending the night with me. It was different. She did not seem to accept that answer and kept insisting. "They're already here, what's one more? He's really easy, I promise." I told her again that I was not comfortable with it, but she kept pushing. We went back and forth a few more times, and I could tell she was getting frustrated, but I stood my ground. I had already heard from some of the others that Ally had a habit of just leaving her kid with people whether they agreed to it or not, and I did not feel like dealing with the hassle of tracking her down later. Eventually, I just told her flat out no, apologized to her son, and closed the door. The next day, everything seemed fine, but I started noticing a shift in how some of the others were acting towards me. It was subtle, but there were some weird looks and a few side comments that I could not quite make sense of. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was imagining things. A couple of days later, I took my niece and nephew to the resort cafe to get ice cream. A few of the other kids were hanging around, so I offered to take them too. Some of the parents immediately declined, but a few of them gave me these strange, almost judgmental looks. I asked my friend if she knew what was going on, and that was when she told me what had happened. Apparently, at breakfast the morning after my interaction with Ally, she had complained to the group about what I did. She had spun it like I was being unfair, saying that I was perfectly willing to take care of my brother's kids, but refused to help out anyone else. A few of them had taken her side, and now there was this unspoken tension in the group. Later that night, things escalated when one of the wives of my brother's friends approached me at dinner. She asked if I could watch her kid that night so she and her husband could go out. I told her no, explaining that my niece and nephew were with their parents for the night and that the younger siblings were planning to go out together. She was not happy with that response. She pointed out that I had taken the kids for ice cream earlier, and since they had said no at the time, I owed them now. I was honestly taken aback. She kept insisting it was not a big deal and that I could just go out tomorrow instead. I simply said, "Sorry, I can't," and left it at that. That moment seemed to open the floodgates because after that, I started getting more and more similar requests. It became clear that some of the parents now saw me as a free babysitting service just because I had agreed to help my brother out. I continued to say no, but the passive-aggressive comments did not stop. Eventually, my brother caught wind of what was happening. He was furious. He stepped in and made it very clear to everyone that he had paid for my vacation, which was why I had agreed to help him and his wife for a couple of days. He also pointed out that if they wanted my help, they could contribute financially as well. That shut most of them up pretty quickly. Even after that, though, I could tell that some of the people in the group still felt like I had been unfair. When I talked to my mom and some of my friends about it later, they had mixed reactions. A few of them agreed that I had done nothing wrong, but others pointed out that my brother and his wife had actually gotten to enjoy their vacation while the other parents did not. Some of them suggested that I could have at least offered to take the other kids while I was already watching my niece and nephew. But at the end of the day, I never signed up to be anyone else's babysitter. I agreed to help my brother because he asked me directly and compensated me accordingly. The others just assumed they were entitled to my time, and that is what bothered me the most. I do not regret standing my ground, but the whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. I never thought a simple vacation could turn into such a mess, but I guess some people will take whatever they can get if you let them. Update 1. As the days went by, the tension in the group had settled a little, though I could still feel the occasional awkwardness from certain people. I was determined to just enjoy my vacation and not let the whole situation ruin my time. After all, I had done nothing wrong. I had agreed to help my brother and his wife in exchange for my trip being covered, and I had set my boundaries with the others. That should have been the end of it. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the families, a couple who had remained fairly neutral throughout all the drama, approached me with an offer. They said they understood that I had agreed to watch my niece and nephew as part of an arrangement with my brother and that they did not expect free babysitting. However, they really wanted to go for a walk together, just the two of them, without worrying about their kid. They offered to pay me if I would be willing to watch him for a few hours. At first, I hesitated. I did not want to reopen this whole can of worms, but then I thought about it logically. This was completely different from what the others had been doing. They were not demanding my time or acting entitled to it. They were offering compensation in exchange for my help, just like my brother had done. So, I figured, why not? I agreed, and they paid me up front, which I appreciated. Their kid was actually really easy to watch. He played quietly, didn't cause any problems, and before I knew it, the couple had returned, refreshed and grateful. It was an easy arrangement, and honestly, if more people had approached me like that from the beginning, things might not have been so tense. But, of course, the peace did not last long. The next evening, as I was winding down in my room, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, Ally. The same woman who had tried to dump her kid on me that first night without permission. She stood there with a smug expression, her son by her side, and in her hand, a couple of crumpled bills. She held them out to me and said something along the lines of, "Here, take this and watch him for a few hours." I stared at the money in her hand, suppressing a laugh. It was barely anything, maybe a couple of dollars at most. I could not believe she was seriously trying to do this. I shook my head and told her no. That amount was way too little. That was when she exploded. She demanded to know why I had watched someone else's kid for money, but was refusing hers. She started ranting about how it was unfair, how I was playing favorites, and how ridiculous it was that I would suddenly start charging when I had originally refused everyone. I calmly told her that the other family had made a respectful request, paid me a reasonable amount, and had not tried to dump their child on me without asking first. She was different. She had tried to guilt me into taking her kid from the very beginning and was now throwing a tantrum because she had not gotten her way. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I actually thought she was going to scream at me. Instead, she scoffed, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off with her son in tow. That alone would have been enough drama for the night, but things got even stranger the next day. While at breakfast, I overheard some of the other parents whispering. Apparently, Ally had been going around trying to get people on her side again, telling them exaggerated versions of what had happened. I rolled my eyes and ignored it. At this point, I was used to her antics. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the other moms, someone who had originally given me weird looks after Ally's first rant, suddenly flipped sides. She spoke up in front of everyone and said something along the lines of, "Honestly, I don't blame her for refusing. If you actually offered her real money instead of tossing some loose change at her, maybe she'd consider it." Ally was stunned silent. It was clear that some of the other parents were starting to realize how ridiculous this whole thing was. Some of them were still on Ally's side, but others, especially the ones who had not asked me for babysitting in the first place, were clearly over the drama. I felt a small sense of satisfaction seeing Ally's plan backfire. I thought that was the end of it. But I was wrong. That afternoon, as I was walking back to my room, I saw Ally and one of her friends whispering near the pool. They stopped when they saw me, and Ally shot me a look that could kill. I rolled my eyes and kept walking, not thinking much of it. That night, after dinner, something bizarre happened. I was heading back to my room when I noticed my door was slightly open. My heart dropped. I knew I had locked it before I left. I pushed it open slowly, my mind racing. Had someone broken in? Was something stolen? But when I stepped inside, I found something even stranger. Sitting on my bed, looking completely unbothered, was Ally's son. For a moment, I was so shocked I couldn't even react. He just sat there, swinging his little legs, looking like he had been there for a while. I turned around and stormed back outside, looking around for Ally. I spotted her at the bar with a drink in her hand, laughing with a few other parents. I marched right up to her and, without hesitation, said, "Did you seriously leave your son in my room?" She turned to me with a fake innocent look and said, "Oh, did he wander in there? That's so strange." I was furious. I told her flat out that this was unacceptable, that she had crossed a line, and that if she ever pulled something like this again, I would tell the resort staff. That seemed to rattle her because she quickly backpedaled and said it was just a mistake, that he must have gone in by accident. But I knew the truth. She had left him there on purpose, assuming I would just take care of him. I had never been so angry in my life. After that, I made sure my door was double locked at all times. I also made it clear to everyone that if another parent tried to dump their kid on me without my consent, I would escalate the situation to the resort management. That seemed to finally put an end to it. For the rest of the trip, Ally avoided me, and the parents who had sided with her suddenly kept their distance. Meanwhile, the parents who had originally been skeptical started warming up to me again, likely realizing that Ally had been exaggerating the entire situation from the beginning. By the time the vacation ended, I was more than ready to go home. Looking back, I still can't believe how ridiculous the whole thing got. What was supposed to be a relaxing trip turned into a bizarre battle over babysitting, entitlement, and just pure audacity. But at the end of the day, I stood my ground, and I'm glad I did. Update 2. When we finally returned home from the trip, I thought that would be the end of the drama. I had drawn my boundaries, shut down the entitlement, and even had my brother step in when things got out of hand. I assumed that once everyone got back to their normal lives, people would move on and forget about the whole ordeal. I was wrong. It didn't take long for the fallout to start trickling in. At first, it was just subtle things, certain people unfollowing me on social media, the occasional passive-aggressive comment on group chats about how some people think they're better than others just because they get free vacations. I ignored it, knowing exactly where it was coming from. Ally had not let this go. Then, I started hearing from mutual friends who weren't on the trip but were connected to some of the people who were. They told me that Ally had been spreading stories about me, twisting the situation to make it seem like I was some sort of villain. According to her, I had acted like I was above everyone, lording my free vacation over the other parents. She claimed that I had agreed to help with my niece and nephew, but then bragged about not helping anyone else. She made it sound like I had been rubbing it in their faces, flaunting how I got to relax, while they were struggling with their kids. Of course, that wasn't even close to the truth. I had watched my niece and nephew because my brother had asked me in advance and compensated me for my time. I had been polite but firm when I told the others no, yet somehow, Ally had spun it into some ridiculous sob story where I was the evil vacation villain who had selfishly refused to help struggling parents. What was even worse was that she outright lied about the situation with her son. In her version of the story, I had invited other parents to leave their kids with me for money but refused to watch hers because I didn't like her. She made it sound like I had been babysitting other kids left and right, happily accepting cash like I was running some kind of resort daycare, and had purposefully excluded her out of pettiness. I wasn't surprised that she twisted the story, but what did surprise me was how many people actually believed her. For weeks after we got back, I started noticing that certain people I used to be friendly with, were suddenly cold towards me. A couple of them even made passive-aggressive posts on social media about people who act like they're too good to help others and how some people only care about money. It was so transparent that I almost laughed. But the part that annoyed me the most? My close friends, the ones who knew me, started getting questions from mutuals. Did she really refuse to help? Did she actually make money off babysitting but refuse Ally's kid? I was beyond frustrated. I hadn't lied about anything, yet here I was, having to defend myself against some ridiculous smear campaign from a grown woman who was mad she couldn't use me as free childcare. Then, there was my brother. One night, not long after we got back, he pulled me aside and apologized. He told me he hadn't realized how entitled some of his friends had been acting and that if he had known things were going to escalate like that, he would have stepped in earlier. He admitted that he had heard some of the ridiculous rumors circulating after the trip and assured me that he was shutting them down whenever he heard them. He told me that none of this should have happened and that he would make sure it wouldn't happen again. That meant a lot to me. He had always been the type to have my back, but hearing him actually acknowledge what had happened and promise it wouldn't be repeated made me feel a little better. But even with my brother's support, things didn't die down immediately. There were a few more bizarre situations in the weeks that followed. One of them was when I ran into a mutual acquaintance at a party. I had barely spoken to this person in years, but as soon as they saw me, they smirked and said something like, "Oh, so you're the one charging for babysitting now, huh?" I was so taken aback that I just laughed and walked away. What was even the point of engaging? Then there was the moment when one of the other moms, one who had originally been neutral but had clearly been influenced by Ally, decided to confront me at a gathering. She casually mentioned how unfair it was that my brother got a break on vacation while the other parents didn't. She tried to make it sound like a general observation, but it was clear she was trying to get a reaction out of me. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I just smiled and said, "Maybe next time, you should make an arrangement with someone before the trip." Her face turned red, and she quickly changed the subject. But the wildest situation? One day, I got a message from someone I hadn't talked to in years. It was a girl who had once been part of our social circle, but had moved away. She told me that she had been catching up with some old friends when she heard my name come up. Apparently, Ally had been so dedicated to making me look bad that she had brought up the vacation drama to people who weren't even involved. The kicker? This girl didn't even know Ally. She had never met her, never spoken to her, had zero connection to her. Yet Ally had been so determined to spread her version of the story that she had vented about it to complete strangers. At that point, I realized just how much I had been living rent-free in Ally's head. It was ridiculous. She had lost whatever battle she thought she was fighting the second she had to lie to make herself look better. And even though some people had sided with her, it was clear that others had started seeing through her nonsense. Eventually, the drama started to die down. People moved on, new gossip replaced the old, and Ally stopped trying so hard to keep the story alive when it became clear that not everyone was buying into her version. But the whole experience left a lasting impression on me. I learned just how entitled some people could be, how quickly people could turn on you over the dumbest things, and how easily a simple vacation could spiral into something absurd. I also learned to trust my instincts. The second Ally tried to dump her kid on me that first night, I knew she was going to be a problem. I had been right. Update 3. When my brother started planning the next vacation, I could tell he was being extra careful about who he invited. The last trip had been overshadowed by unnecessary drama, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. He pulled together a much smaller, more tight-knit group, family, close friends, and a few people who had actually respected my time on the previous trip. And noticeably absent from the guest list? Ally and her family. It wasn't even a conversation. No one asked about her. No one brought up the idea of inviting her. It was like everyone had silently agreed that she was not welcome, and honestly, it was the best decision we could have made. This time, when we arrived at the resort, there was an immediate difference in the atmosphere. There was no underlying tension, no passive-aggressive comments, no entitled demands. Everyone was there to relax and enjoy themselves, and it actually felt like a vacation. Of course, I still watched my niece and nephew for a couple of days. My brother and his wife deserved their alone time, and since we had worked out the same arrangement as before, I didn't mind. But this time, there was one huge difference. I wasn't being treated like a resort nanny. No one tried to pawn their kids off on me. No one gave me dirty looks when I took my niece and nephew for ice cream. No one whispered at breakfast about how I was unfair. Instead, everyone just respected each other. There were still plenty of kids on the trip, but this time, the parents actually parented their own children. The difference was night and day. Instead of people guilt-tripping me or trying to dump their kids in my room, parents were coordinating with each other, taking turns watching the kids so that everyone got time to relax. It was balanced, and it made me realize just how absurd the last trip had been. One of the funniest moments was when a mom, who had been neutral in the last vacation's drama, casually mentioned how much smoother everything felt without certain people around. She didn't say Ali's name outright, but I could tell exactly who she was referring to. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. Even my brother's wife, Rose, commented on how much more relaxed she felt this time around. She hadn't even realized how much stress the previous group dynamic had caused until she experienced a vacation without all the unnecessary tension. I had actual downtime this trip. I spent afternoons lounging by the pool, reading, sipping drinks, and soaking in the sun. I went on excursions, took amazing pictures, and had the kind of fun that I hadn't even realized I missed the last time. There was one moment that really stood out to me. One evening, we were all sitting on the beach, watching the sunset, when my brother turned to me and just thanked me. Not for watching his kids, that was already part of our deal, but for putting up with the ridiculousness of the last vacation. He admitted that he had underestimated how bad it had gotten and promised that he would never let that kind of situation happen again. I could tell he genuinely meant it. And honestly, that moment made everything worth it. At the end of the trip, as we were packing up and getting ready to leave, I realized something: I had actually enjoyed myself. There was no lingering frustration, no resentment, no exhaustion from dealing with entitled people. Just good memories and the satisfaction of knowing that this time, I had been treated with respect. Now, looking back on it, I can't help but wonder, was I wrong on that first trip? Should I have handled things differently? But the more I think about it, the more I realize that I did nothing wrong. I had set a reasonable boundary, and instead of respecting it, some people had decided to throw a tantrum. That was on them, not me. And seeing how this vacation turned out without those people? It only confirmed what I already knew: some people will always try to take advantage, but the right people? The good people? They'll respect you, your time, and your choices. So if anyone else has ever dealt with a situation like this, where you were made to feel like you owed people something just because you were available, just know that you are not the problem. If setting boundaries makes people mad, that says more about them than it does about you. This vacation proved that. And as for Ali? Well, let's just say that when the next trip was planned, her name never came up again.